With it being a Friday, it's time to answer a ton of questions from our mailbag. Next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, or YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. So if you want to start winning some money, start placing some bets, whether it be the winner of that game or some prop bets, just do it over at FanDuel. We have a great code that can really win you a lot of money. Just by winning a $5 bet, you can win as much as $150 just by winning that $5 bet. But more on them coming up throughout today's show. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Podcast Network. If you want to know a little bit more about me, I work here in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I got a show once a week over there. Also a show Monday through Friday on ESPN Kansas City. So if you ever want my thoughts on things that may not pertain to just Major League Baseball and the Royals, you can check me out over there. But if you come to this podcast, you click on this link or this video, you know that you were getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Now, with it being a Friday, I always have to reiterate this just for those first-time listeners. Fridays are always going to be dedicated to our mailbag segment. They're going to be dedicated to the listeners, the followers. Whatever question you may have about the Royals, you send my way, and I try to answer it in a timely manner in this episode. And sometimes we've got 20 questions, and I have to give more rapid answers. Sometimes, like today, we only have about 10 questions, so I can give more length to each of those answers, which is probably good for those who ask the questions, so I can give you more of a personalized and thought-out answer than maybe a quick one due to the time here in a 30-minute episode. But don't want to waste any time, as we always try to say on a Mailbag Friday. All right, let's dive into question number one. This one comes from Danny Penn. He says, what's your wildest prediction about a player who impresses this year, MLB or the minors? Well, I want to be realistic, but also give you a hot take pick. To me, it feels like this is, where it can be more of an educated guess than just throwing something against the wall. If you've listened long enough, you would know that, I'm a fan of MJ Melendez. I think MJ Melendez is going to bounce back, but one that is slowly started to creep up on me, I think Hunter Renfroe can be a 30 home run guy again. I don't know if that's hot takey enough, but since he got his spring debut today, I know the Royals think of him highly, think he's going to bounce back. But we know about the power in there. We know there is a tremendous power bat. Maybe that's not hot takey enough because he's had a couple of 30 home run seasons. But coming off last year, man, I think he can do 30 home runs if he stays with the Royals the entire year, which with that club option, it feels like he will be sticking around the majority of this year. So I think he's a 30 home run guy. If he can cut down on the swing and miss a little bit, which isn't terrible to begin with, I think he can have that 30 home run power, which could translate to anywhere from a 90 to 100 RBI season. So if I got to be a little bit more of a hot take there, Hunter Renfroe wasn't that great last year. This really feels like a year he can bounce back, and those certainly would be bounce back numbers. Next question comes from Jason. With Brent struggling badly, does Josh Taylor have a shot at getting the lefty spot? 100%. I think that Josh Taylor is certainly in the running there. Jake Brentz has kind of put himself on the outside looking in. I'm not overly concerned with Jake Brenson, what he's been throwing in terms of his pitch arsenal, the velocity. I'm not really alarmed by that. It's just the command. I don't think Jake Brentz has anywhere near the command that he once had back in 2021. This is a guy who hasn't pitched in a year and a half, basically. Actually, almost 2 full years. He was out pretty much the majority of 2022 and all of 2023. It was always a long shot for him to make it. I had him on my opening day roster projection, mainly because the Royals just kept hanging on to him. It was a 40-man roster spot. I'm like, this feels like the most easy decision you could have. a guy who hasn't pitched in 2 years, why are you still giving him a 40-man roster spot? So I thought he'd make the roster simply because they believe in him. They feel like there's something there. And spring training is spring training. He might be working through some troubles. He might be working through some mechanical flaws. But whereas these other guys who are fighting for spots, they're showing better command. They're showing better numbers. Yeah, I think there's been a couple of guys that have leapfrogged Jake Brent so far. And I do think that somebody like Josh Taylor can be that guy. So far, so good for him in spring. Jake Brent's, it's going to be a long battle at this point. He's only had 3 outings, but I think he's got 7 or 8 walks, might even be 9 walks after today. It's been ugly. It's been really, really bad. He does have 5 strikeouts, I think, or it might be 4 to 5 strikeouts, I know. So he's getting some swing and miss, but also a lot of inefficiency, a lot of wild, erratic type of pitches that are missing the zone. Yeah, I think he has dropped down a couple of levels in terms of that lefty spot in the bullpen. So Josh Taylor, 100%. He's got a shot to make it if it's not going to be Jake Brent's, which I just don't really believe it is going to be. This one comes from Aiden. Do you take any value in what the Royals rotation has done so far in spring training, and can it translate over to the regular season? Good question. We touched on this a little bit yesterday. The starting rotation after Cole Ragans today, which we'll talk about in our final segment today, 12 innings, 17 strikeouts, only 2 walks. I think they've allowed 6 hits, and no runs. They've had 12 shutout innings in spring. And I think the best way to describe this is it is exhibition. You're not facing an everyday lineup. The stakes are very, very low, but it's also better than the alternative. Like, how would we all feel if they'd given up 12 runs in 12 innings? Would we be feeling very good right now? I think I'd try to talk myself off the ledge and say it is spring training, but it's better than the alternative. These games don't matter in the end. These stats don't matter. Well, at least I might enjoy some of their outings, and these have been very enjoyable outings. But to your point about can it translate to the regular season, it's not that simple, but I do think there's this mentality with this group of they want to be as clean and as polished up as they can be going into the regular season. And so far, they've done exactly that. I know that throughout the last few weeks, I've said, don't care about the numbers, don't care about the strikeouts and the walks. I'm purely about stuff and command, which I guess that does go hand in hand with strikeouts and walks. And so far, the swing and miss has been great. The stuff looks good. The velocity looks good. I'm very pleased. I give it an A+ so far for the rotation. Now, there are going to be some outings where stuff goes south. It's not going to be as pretty. The more they lengthen them out, the more you feel like they might try to work on more stuff or really try to fine-tune something, and that could lead to a poor outing. But through the first chances they've had, really impressive stuff, and they'll be able to carry that torch tomorrow as Seth Lugo goes against Cleveland, and then Michael Walker will throw on Sunday. Next question we got comes from Tom. With Carlos Hernandez likely starting on the injured list, does someone like Sam Long or Tyler Duffy have a better shot at the roster? That's another great question. Yeah, with the question about Jake Brent and Josh Taylor, Sam Long's another guy I'd throw in that conversation of making the club as a lefty. Right now, if I had to pick somebody to make the roster ahead of Brent or ahead of Taylor or ahead of Daniel Lynch, it'd be Tyler Duffy. Tyler Duffy is a very familiar face to the Royals front office and to the Royals team. He's been around the big leagues for quite some time. I think he's got a great curveball that can play, and I think there's a spot for him in this bullpen, assuming he can just win it out of camp. Sam Long, yes, but the longevity's not there, and he, numbers-wise, was not good at all for Oakland last year. He is a lefty. He does provide you, like Duffy, with a really good curveball, but Duffy's done it before. And Duffy had his season cut short last year due to the injury. Otherwise, he would have been a very consistent guy, I think, in that Chicago bullpen. So to me, I think Tyler Duffy right now might be that front runner to make the team coming out of camp, unless they just wanted to hand that spot to Daniel Lynch out of the bullpen or go with a 6-man rotation. We'd really see about that. Well, we still got plenty of questions to get into, so let's take a quick break and come back and open up that mailbag a little bit more to close out our Mailbag Friday. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the title sponsor today in FanDuel. Now, with FanDuel, you can get buckets with your first bet with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And March Madness, of course, going to be in full swing later on this month. Major League Baseball is going to be in full swing later on this month. We got conference tournaments. There are so many things to bet on and win you some money right now. But again, I emphasize, use that code of Locked On, and any winning $5 bet, you can get $150 to use on those future bets. So that's something I feel like you never want to turn down. And with all these great opportunities to start winning some money, head over to FanDuel and create your account today. Let's continue with our Mailbag Friday segment and more questions coming from the listeners. This one is from Michael. He says, I love Maikel Garcia in general, but definitely in leadoff spot, or he loves him definitely in the leadoff spot. But if he starts to struggle, who slides into that spot? This is another good question, and I do feel like there's a couple of different options. They have tried MJ Melendez in that spot, but to me, that really comes down to, what does MJ look like? Is MJ struggling like he was last year in the first half, or does he look like the second half version of him? Because if you get the second half version of MJ Melendez, I would pencil him into the leadoff spot. I'm just not on board with putting Bobby Witt Jr. there. I get the speed. I get that he can be your best hitter in this lineup. But if I'm being quite honest with you, I think it's a lack of a spot to put him there. It's not really showcasing him to the best of your ability. I want Bobby Witt Jr. hitting in the 3-hole. I want him to be able to drive in runs. I want to put your best hitter in the 3 spot. And I get it could be Vinny Pasquantino, and you could bump Bobby Witt Jr. to the 2-hole, but I'm also on board with going Maikel, Vinny, and then Bobby. I think you get that righty. You have a great on-base guy in Vinny, who might also be another dark horse to lead off. And where if you were saying something like that's a base clogger, makes no sense. It doesn't, compute with me. Nick Prado was the leadoff hitter for a while. He's a little bit of a base clogger. He might be slightly more athletic than Vinny Pasquantino, but not by much. If you went with that Kyle Schwarber approach of just the high OBP guy, let's lead him off, Vinny and MJ could lead that category. I just don't want to put Bobby Witt Jr. to leadoff spot again. I think Maikel Garcia, even if he is struggling, work him through it. Because to me, he is the leadoff hitter that you want. If he can see more pitches, if he can draw that walk rate up a little bit, then he's the perfect leadoff guy. He's not a base clogger. He hits the ball hard, and he can get on base. It's exactly what you want from your leadoff guy. I just don't think it's going to be a spot where he does get bumped out of it unless he's really struggling. Like he's hitting down in the $150, $160 range, which, of course, I really don't envision happening in 2024. Next question comes from Bob. He says, best case win-loss record, worst case win-loss record. I mean, best case scenario, which we've gone over a lot on the show, I think would be somewhere between 85 and 88 wins. That's best case. That's a couple of the guys that we talked about bouncing back. You've got your superstars and Bobby Witt Jr. and Cole Ragans. Vinny Pasquantino has a fully healthy season. Waka, Lugo, they stabilize rotation. Brady Singer bounces back, and Lyles, just kind of becomes a very okay-ish, a doable number 5 starter. Yeah, I think they could get somewhere between the 85 and 88 range. But we all know in baseball, best case scenarios are very unlikely because it's so long, injuries happen. The worst case scenario, I mean, it is the Royals. I probably have to say a 100-loss season because worst case scenario in my mind means injuries. I think they've really raised the talent on this team, but if guys can't stay healthy, then that's going to be the big issue, right? That's going to be where this all comes crumbling down. If the rotation can't stay healthy, the bullpen can't stay healthy, well, then you revert back to what it was last year, relying on a bunch of young guys who can't prove they're the guy. So that means MJ Melendez not progressing, Isbell not progressing, Velasquez not progressing, Massey not progressing, Drew Waters, Blanco not progressing, Vinny Pasquantino can't stay healthy, Bobby and Maikel get banged up, Salvi can't stay healthy, Cole Ragans and Walker and Lugo can't stay healthy. Like, that's worst case scenario, and I'd say in a 100-loss season. Yeah, so it is a big range there, but I feel like a lot of teams think that way. Like, I feel like Detroit would have a very similar look on their season. Cleveland, maybe the same thing as well in the Central. It can be as good as winning 85 to 88 games and competing for a division title, or as bad as bottoming out from 95 to 100 losses. But again, both of those scenarios feel very unlikely to me. I do have my prediction kind of coming together in my head but I'll save that for opening day, and I'll give it on that Thursday morning before I head off to Kauffman Stadium for the start of game one on a 162-game schedule. This one comes from RB Carr. Besides Bobby Witt Jr. or Vinny P., which position player really has to have a good year for this team to be competitive? Great question there. I would throw Michael Garcia into that list as well. I know that his WRC plus wasn't the highest. I think it was around 86 by the end of the year. That needs to get near the 100 range if he can be grouped into the Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino category. I feel like it has to come back to somebody like a Massey or a Melendez, because you can have consistency with Garcia, Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny, and Salvi. Like those four, to me, you can have the consistency. You're hoping the other five can come together. But I look at some guys that were really bad in the lineup last year, like a Michael Massey, or at least from time to time. He got better in the second half. Isbell got better in the second half. Melendez got better in the second half. I think MJ's closer to being in the top four than the bottom five. But again, that's because I'm more of a MJ Melendez supporter than most people out there. But to me, I think if Michael Massey can be that hitter that he was in AA and AAA, boy, that transforms your lineup because that gives you a little bit more pop at the bottom of the order. I mean, as bad as Michael Massey's overall year was, he still ran into 15 home runs. Like, if you think that he starts hot in April and May, I mean, you get a 20 to 25 home run second baseman, that can really make a difference in your lineup. So you know what? I think I'm going to narrow it down to Michael Massey. And from what some of the people have been saying out there, and from what I saw a little bit in spring training, I think there is some belief that he's going to have a much better year in 2024 than he did last year. Next question we have comes from Steven. We have final two here in about 2 minutes. Steven has two questions. Why don't the Royals go after Blake Snell or even Trevor Bauer if they really want to compete, considering they're both non-risk players? Number two, does Lofton start over Massey at second base? I'll start with the Lofton question. It's easy for me. No, I don't see Nick Lofton starting over second base or starting over Massey at second base. If anybody's going to start over Massey, it'll be Adam Frazier because they brought him in to be, somebody that could fill into that role. Nick Lofton, I think, will get every day at bats in AAA before this season begins. He hasn't had the hottest start to spring training, and I think he would have really had to be the team's best hitter to grab that spot from Massey. I would probably lock it into this point. Michael Massey's going to be the starting second baseman. And J.J. Picollo even said that after bringing in Adam Frazier. He's like, Massey's this team's star. We just want to have a little bit more depth, in which we didn't have it last year. As for the Snell and Bauer argument, here's the thing. Snell is a risk signing because he wants a lot of money. Now, I think there was some report that he was willing to take more of a team-friendly deal like what Cody Bellinger got. It was more so 3 years. The money was expensive, but it was about 3 years. Like, Snell's not looking for 5, 6, 7 years. Maybe the closer he gets to the start of the regular season, I'd imagine he wants to get on a team and not be waiting this out and letting Scott Boras do all the talking. But I do think there's risk there. I mean, if you put in a lot of money to Snell and it doesn't work out, well, then it can bite you in the butt. He wants a lot of money. Do not get that mistaken. And the Royals also feel good about the rotation right now. For Bauer, listen, nobody's, jumping at the Trevor Bauer idea. I mean, the fact that he came out there and said, I'll take a minor league deal and show a little bit of that desperation, and nobody is going through with that. Look, I would probably, for the people out there that want Trevor Bauer to be a Royal, it's not going to happen, in my opinion. It's not going to happen, I think, with any team out there. He would have been signed by now. That's kind of where I have to put this to bed. I know there are people that are going, the Cy Young winner, he was great when he was in the big leagues. He was great in Japan last year. But I'm sure a lot of teams are going, okay, it's still a big jump from the Nippon League, from playing over in Japan to coming back to the big leagues. And he hasn't pitched in the big leagues. Coming up now, this will be 2 years removed, 3 years removed, because he was, I think, suspended in the middle of 2021, if I'm not mistaken, his first year with the Dodgers. So 2022, not here. 2023, not here. And he hasn't even had a spring training yet. So to me, I don't think you're looking at the guy that was a Cy Young winner in 2020. I don't think you're getting that version. And teams just don't want to deal with it, quite honest with you. For Snell, money's too high. Scott Boras is his agent. As for somebody like Trevor Bauer, nobody's jumping at the deal. And that should be telling to a lot of people out there. It's not just the Royals. It's everybody in baseball. They're not going to sign Trevor Bauer, barring any unforeseen changes. Because when I see a former Cy Young say, I'll play for the league minimum, no risk here, and nobody was even interested, it should tell you a little bit of something. And lastly, Adam says, Prado saves so many outs at first compared to Vinny, but is there a world where Nick figures it out at the plate enough to be our everyday first baseman with Salvi still on the squad taking so many DH at bats? I will say this, Nick Prado is not as good of a defensive first baseman as you think he is. In fact, I would say him and Vinny are almost interchangeable, and Vinny's a much better bat. Nick Prado strikes out way too much to my liking. I think he can absolutely figure it out. There's still time. He's a young hitter. Think like Ryan O'Hearn. Ryan O'Hearn seemed like a lost cause in Kansas City, immediately caught on in Baltimore. So it can be a quick fix, and then he becomes a very good player. But I do not think there's a world in which Prado will ever be a better player than Vinny. And I know there's a lot of people saying, well, Vinny's never been a full-time player. He's been banged up. You look at some of those advanced numbers, those sabermetric numbers, those advanced data numbers, Vinny is a better and will probably always be a better hitter than Prado. You just hope Prado can be that good secondary option where he can play a little bit of the outfield, play some first base and DH as well. So right now, no, there's not a world for 2024 where I think Prado becomes so good and Vinny regresses, where Prado becomes the full-time first baseman and Vinny can't even get in the lineup every single night. Those are all great questions coming from the listeners. This happens every single Friday on our Mailbag Friday segment. So either send them to me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15 or send them to me on YouTube. And that's the @LockedOnRoyals page. Before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. When we return, Cole Ragans once again stole the show down in Surprise. What more can you say about him? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15 and catch us on wherever you get your podcast, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. The last thing I want to dive into is something we literally talked about earlier this week, and it was Cole Ragans stealing the show. He got lengthened out a little bit more in his start against Oakland today, was pumping 98, 99, 100 in the first inning. He strikes out 3 over 3 scoreless innings, and now in 5 scoreless innings in spring training, he's got 8 strikeouts, only 1 walk, and has given up just 3 hits. I am kind of running out of words for what to say, which maybe was dumb on my part for creating a segment about Cole Ragans, and I'm kind of at a loss of words. That, to me, today, what I saw in these first 2 starts, and I get it, spring training, don't really buy too much stock into it. I'm just really having a hard time saying why he shouldn't be this team's number one. And maybe you're rolling your eyes and you're saying, Jack, you've already gone over this. It's going to be Michael Wacha. It's going to be Lugo. It's not going to be Ragans. He's never been a full-time starter before. I don't know how you look at this stuff as easy as the ball comes out of his hand. Like, I've had a couple people respond to me when I've tweeted about Cole Ragans saying it concerns me that a starter throwing 100 miles an hour this early, they could burn out. That you look at somebody like Jacob deGrom. Jacob deGrom is somebody that throws incredibly hard, had that 95-mile-an-hour slider, can't stay healthy. Or at least once he got older, he couldn't really stay healthy. And I would say most pitchers are not going to be throwing that high of velocity their entire career. There's usually, in their prime, in their mid-20s, late 20s, they really can ramp it up. Unless you're a freak like Nolan Ryan, who can probably still, or probably at the age of, when he was in his 60s and mid-60s and 70s, could have been airing it out at like 90. He's just that type of freak. Nolan Ryan was somebody that I don't think baseball's really ever seen since. Maybe Randy Johnson coming from the left side. And that's not to compare Cole Ragans to either of those 2 guys. I'm not going to do that. Those are 2 legendary Hall of Famers. When people bring up to me that, Cole Ragans throws too hard for spring training, he's got the Tommy John problem in his past. People always try to say it was twice. It was one time, and then he had the setback with it, so that kind of got mixed up. But I look at what makes him great. I look at what makes him stand out. The velocity is going to be a part of that. Like, if you can throw 98, 99, 100, and it's what makes you a great pitcher, well, then why would you take off 4 or 5 miles an hour to your fastball? Now, for spring training, the guns are a little bit hot. Like, if you're throwing 100, 101, it's probably closer to 98, 99. It's not a big jump, but it's not like he's out there trying to throw as hard as he can every single time. I think this is a part of his repeatable delivery. I think this is how hard he can really throw. And the exciting part about it as a Royals fan is that it's one coming from the left side. Anytime you have a lefty that throws that hard, it makes it that much more desirable. But it's the other stuff he's working with. This changeup now has become one of his best pitches. He's got that cutter and that slider and that curveball to toy with a little bit. I mean, this really is a frontline guy. And I get it. People are going to be concerned. They're going to be nervous just because if you're a Royals fan, you're used to having your heart broken, aside from a couple years in the mid-2010s. But I'm not watching every Cole Ragans start and just biting my nails and freaking out that he's going to get hurt. Right? Baseball, you can't predict it. Right? Some guys are going to get hurt. There are going to be guys that play a lot of games for the Royals. They start a lot of games for the Royals, have a lot of relief appearances, are in the lineup every single day. Somebody's going to get banged up. They're going to deal with something. That's baseball. That is not controllable. You can't go through a 162-game season and everybody's got the perfect health. You hope you get through with maybe 3, 4 to 5 guys on your 26-man roster missing time. Like, that's the best case scenario, it feels like. But more likely or not, you're going to have about 8 to 9 to 10 guys, depending on the severity of the injury, miss some time with a banged up something. For Cole Ragans, I just urge people to enjoy what you're watching. No, this is a transcendent talent right now that is about to burst onto the national scene. And when you're watching him in spring and you're going, oh man, he's throwing too hard. He's got the Tommy John problem of the past. Like, I'm taking that mentality, that approach with him. I'm taking it as, you don't need to get carried away and say right now it's the Cy Young winner. But people are excited about Cole Ragans because there's not many guys that have pitched in the Royals uniform that have stuff like this. This is freakish stuff. This is stuff that doesn't just pop up in your farm system. It would be hard to find a pitcher in the draft class this year to have stuff like Cole Ragans. If Texas would go back in time and they won a World Series, I don't think they're shedding any tears. But if they could go back in time and somehow not give up Cole Ragans, and this is what he looked like, I think he would be one of the more untouchable guys in their organization. Like, that's how quickly things can change. Cole Ragans went from, he's not been great out of our bullpen. He's a little bit more of an aged prospect. He's had Tommy John problems. Sure, we'll include him in that deal. And now the Royals have turned him into a dark horse candidate for a Cy Young award, and he becomes an untouchable guy in your organization. Like, we're talking about Cole Ragans now as a guy you hope you can lock up to an extension. It's been a couple of months. My mentality of it, just enjoy what you're seeing. And, again, you don't want to get too ahead of yourself. I'm always a superstitious person with baseball, so I'll knock on wood. You can hear it through the microphone. But I'm excited to see after spring training what he can do. Maybe he's an opening day starter. Maybe he's the number 2 or number 3 in this rotation. It doesn't matter. He's becoming that guy that's must-watch TV. When he's on, when he's throwing, you're buying tickets. If you're traveling for a road game, we'll be on the road a couple of times this year, going to games and watching this team. The game you'd want to pick is Cole Ragans starting. That's just the way it's going to go. And there's been few times as Royals fans you've been able to do that. Going back to 2000, it was if Zach took the bump, you wanted to see it. If James Shields took the bump, you wanted to see it. If Yordan Ventura took the bump, you wanted to see it. And for a very small portion of time, when Danny Duffy took the ball, you wanted to see Danny Duffy. But I honestly think Cole Ragans has already eclipsed what Danny Duffy did. Danny Duffy has the longevity. He pitched a number of years, was a World Series champion, but Danny Duffy was never a dark horse candidate for a Cy Young award. What Cole Ragans did in the minimal amount of time and what he showed in spring training, people are starting to jump on the bandwagon, and that should be very, very exciting for every Royals fan out there that is engaged and watching him. Okay, that's going to do it for the week on Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me that follow on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Okay, so we're going to have Seth Lugo throwing tomorrow, Michael Walker throwing on Sunday, and we'll have plenty to recap when we come back on Monday. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.